Hello and welcome to another episode of Dragon's Library. Let me close the door real quick. Should have thought about that. Watch out, puppy. My dog's got his foot in the way. Sorry about that. Anyway, this is a live show, so you're going to see some of how the sausage is made. As usual, I'd like to do my shows live. Because I like to make these shows interactive, so I like to talk to you all if you have questions, but also so you can sort of see that, there's no editing, there's no cutting that goes into this stuff. So everything I say is out there. We can refer back to it. We don't have to worry about anything getting lost. Before I get started, this is going to be maybe a hard to hear show because we're going to not only talk about character driven story, which I need to edit the title, I just realized, but this also may be a two-parter, so I'll worry about the title later. But to talk about character-driven story, we're going to have to talk about characters. And I firmly believe that you learn better as a writer, you learn better in your craft by experiencing bad writing rather than good writing. So sharing good examples of story and character, while beneficial, I don't believe it's as beneficial as seeing what a bad example is and why, and hearing why that's a bad example. So we're going to delve into some bad examples of characters and character driven story, and some of those you may not agree with. Now bear in mind that everything that we do as writers is entirely subjective. So what I think is an example of bad writing, you may not think so, and so I don't want you to if you disagree with that example, find another example. I really want people to learn, don't just dismiss bad writing. You can use bad writing to make yourself better, to learn what not to do. I've done it many times. I've read, this is the Dragon's Library. You can see a fraction of the books I have behind me. There's a whole nother wall that wraps around this way, well over 1,000 books, and many of those books are not that great. Some of them are okay. A few of them, because I'm a collector and I keep everything, a few of them are terrible, and they're still in my library. So you do learn a lot. Don't dismiss bad writing just because it's bad. Learn from it. Sometimes you can't get all the way through it, but at least learn from it. And because of that, I failed you in the last episode, and we're going to redress that before we jump into this. But before all of that, welcome to the show again. This is a live show. I'm Trevor, your host. Lessons from the Dragon's Library. You can find links to contact information and all that stuff below. As usual, this is an ad-free live show, but I am sponsored by thebeardstruggle.com. We're not going to give you an ad, but if you're interested in beard care, check out the website. I use it. It's good stuff. You can save 15% if you use the code BeardWizard99. Yes, that's me. I got to create my own code. So check it out if you're looking for beard care products. So far, what I've tried of theirs is good stuff. I would not recommend it if it wasn't. They don't pay me to do that, obviously. I like it, and yes, I do get commission off the code, but I would not recommend it if I did not like it. Anyway, so we're going to jump into last episode. We talked about using death in your writing, using death correctly and meaningfully in your writing. In the last episode, I also, sorry, I'm going to bounce around a little bit. The comments were off because I had switched it to safe for children. Apparently YouTube disables comments when you do that. So the chat is open. If you have questions, you want me to stop, you want me to go back, you disagree, whatever, drop it in the chat. Let me know what you think. I will answer your questions to the best of my ability. So last episode we talked about death, how to use death right, how to use death meaningfully in story, and I failed you because I did not give you a bad example. I gave you good examples, which again are important, but I think more importantly is how a bad example works. So I was thinking about this, I was rolling this around in my head, and it's going to be a theme for this show as well. But I went back to one of the last bad death scenes, one of the last meaningless death scenes that I really remember, that I think a lot of people are going to remember. And this is where things may get a little uncomfortable for people because they may not like this answer or this example. But if you haven't seen, I'm going to break it down for you why this is a bad example. But if you watched the movie The Last Jedi, the Star Wars movie, that Rian Johnson wrote and directed. I believe wrote and directed. Yeah, there was a character in there named General Holdo. I think it was General Holdo. Holdo was her name. She was introduced partway through the movie. We've never heard of her before. Never been introduced to this character before. We don't know anything about this character. And she's brought into the show to help, or brought into the movie, into the story to help the resistance, the rebels, in their flight away from, the remnants of the First Order. So bad guys are chasing the good guys. This character Holdo's brought in to help lead some of the ships, and there comes a time where they need to abandon their flagship into escape pods, and Holdo is going to stay aboard and do this last ditch sacrificial move to save them time. Now, bear in mind, we don't know anything about this character. We're introduced to this character as if we should know her. We're introduced to this character when Leia says, hey, this is my friend, who we've never heard of. It's a main character's good friend, and we've never seen them before. And I'm going to have her take over and be in command while I think it was, and I've only seen the movie like twice, I think, because I really didn't care for it. It was when Leia was injured, when Holdo comes in, and when we're first introduced to this character, she is very, very hostile toward one of our main characters, Poe Dameron. Now, when you introduce a character, if you want this character to be sympathetic, or you want this character to be liked by the audience, that character doesn't necessarily have to get along with or be nice to your main characters, but be careful, because if you have a main character that people do like, and you bring another character into the story who is hostile toward them, or mean toward them, or does not like them, or treats them like garbage, which is what Holdo pretty much treated Poe, like he was. But then again, the Poe character was written very poorly in that movie too. You make that character less sympathetic. If you have a character that people enjoy watching or reading about or seeing, and they like this character, and you bring somebody in, they become friends with that character. Your audience is going to become friends with your sympathetic characters. That's why they feel things for these characters. They feel like they know them. Then you bring in another character that's going to be a jerk to this person, and that person is not going to be liked by most of your audience. They are not going to like them unless they don't like the character they're being mean to. Now, when we're introduced to Poe in the original sequel movie, The Force Awakens, Poe's a very likable character. He and Finn get along really well. They have good chemistry on screen. They're very good companions, very good compatriots. And you grow to like Poe as that roguish, I don't want to say totally the Han Solo of the sequel trip, but he's got that sort of roguish cowboy sort of character arc going on. And so when you bring in another character that's kind of a jerk to him, you're not going to like that character. So anyway, to the point, Holdo is killed off in that movie, spoiler alert, in this last ditch effort to give the resistance time to get away. And the reason that is a bad example of how to use death in a story, because it was supposed to mean something and it didn't. We didn't know this character. They were only on screen long enough for us to really not like them, because she was just not very nice to a main character that we did like. So when it came time for her to make this sacrificial move, who cares? And when you use death in your story, if it's going to be a named character that supposedly has a backstory and is part of the major plot, and you kill them off, there needs to be a very good reason, and it needs to mean something. And the death of Holdo in the Force, or in The Last Jedi, was a meaningless death in that story. A better example would have been to use Akbar in that scene. Rather than kill Akbar off ignominiously in an earlier scene in that movie, Akbar should have been the one that bought time for the rebels to get away, because he was a known character that everybody likes, and his loss, his death in that sort of scene would have meant so much more than it did in the movie. He was killed off as if he didn't mean anything. So The Last Jedi is a very good example of a very bad way to use death in your story, a very poor example of writing when it comes to death. So there's your bad example for that. Again, I think you learn more from looking at poorly done writing examples than you do from looking at things that are supposed to be good writing or good books that sell a lot, and I don't think you learn as much from them when they're doing it right. So anyway, we're going to move on to today's topic, which is character-driven story. That's a pretty broad topic. Necessary Whimsy, if you don't know her, check her out on Twitter. She is a writer and a reviewer. She reviews books. She does a very unique review style where she pairs a book with a cigar and a type of whiskey, whether it be bourbon or scotch or whatever, and she not only tells you about the book, but she tells you what it was like to experience the book with those things together. So it's a very cool review style. When she first reviewed one of my books, I thought that was very interesting. I sent her examples, and she asked me what if I were to suggest a pairing of whiskey and cigars with my books, what would I suggest? And I gave her my suggestions. So it's cool. Check out Necessary Whimsy on Twitter. She brought this idea to me. So the reason this may be a two-parter is because we may have to go on longer than I think would be beneficial for you for this lesson. But I don't think you can do character-driven story until you have a good grasp of character. What makes a good character, what makes a consistent character, because literally character-driven story is driven by the character. If the character's not good, your story's not going to be good, if that's what you're writing. My tip for this lesson, and something that I think you would benefit from because I did, is check out Orson Scott Card's book on characters and viewpoint. I picked this up a couple years ago. I actually recently finished it. I read part of it and I put it down and didn't really get back to it for a long time. Then I sat down and finally made myself go through the whole thing. He does a really good job of covering character, viewpoint, as well as character-driven story and milieu story and a couple of other examples of story. It was a good book. It was very informative. It helped me a lot with my current work in progress and really hone my focus on what types of stories I want to write. And that's sort of what you're going to have to decide when you're going to write, whether you're going to write a character-driven story, an idea story, or a milieu story. I write fantasy, mostly speculative fiction, and for the most part, speculative fiction, fantasy, and science fiction are either one of two things. They're usually character-driven story or they're milieu story. If you're not familiar with the term, a milieu story is a story that's really about the setting, the world. For example, Lord of the Rings or a Game of Thrones. Those are more milieu stories than they are character stories, especially Game of Thrones. While there's a lot of main characters in a Game of Thrones. There's not really a main character. And as a matter of fact, if you've read the books rather than just watched the show, you'll know that Martin separates the books by chapter, and each chapter is about a specific character from the viewpoint of that character. So character development is not very linear in those books, and those books are very heavy in the milieu, in the setting. So that's what determines whether you're going to write a book that's what happens to the characters and you kind of salt and pepper the story with the setting, or whether the story is about the setting, about the world and the things that happen in it, and you sort of salt and pepper it with the characters. You're going to have to make that decision when you sit down to write, because both of them are so different. It will be very difficult to switch midway through. But we're talking about character-driven story today, and I think we need to look at character. First of all, you got to have a good character. You got to have a consistent character in order to deliver a good character-driven story. I'm going to open my notebook here for some notes. One of the things that I wanted to make sure to say in that is that your character if he or she's going to be your main character, you need to make sure that they're sympathetic, that they are something that your audience can find something to relate to. You don't want to make them so abnormal or so powerful or so just not something that people can see themselves as. You really want your character. I mean, it's the common drawback of writing a character like, say, Superman. It's really impossible for people to relate to Superman as Kal-El, the Man of Steel, the most powerful fly. He can fly, he's bulletproof, laser eyes, super breath, all that stuff. That's not something a person can relate to because we don't know. We can't even conceive of what that's like. We have nothing to compare it to in our own lives. There's not even heat vision that we can warm up a bowl of soup. But like, those things don't exist even in small quantities. We're not even remotely bulletproof. We can't fly. We can't even glide without equipment. So to relate to Superman, the writers created Clark Kent because that's something we can relate to. So that's something you got to think about when you create your character. First of all, is that character needs to be something people can imagine themselves in situations or in that perspective or in those feelings. Your audience needs to get that, and then your character needs to be consistent, especially in a character-driven story. If your character is going to drive the plot and your character is inconsistent, your plot will be inconsistent. And that's what a character-driven story is. A character-driven story is a story driven by the character or characters in it. The plot follows their motivations and desires. It follows their decisions and the repercussions of those decisions. If your character is constantly bouncing around, doing... I don't want to say unexpected things because sometimes you want the unexpected, but if they just bounce around doing whatever, just chaotic behavior all the time, your plot is going to be completely chaotic and people will not be able to follow along. So consistency is important. So when I was thinking about that, when I was thinking about what makes a good character and what makes a character consistent and a good character-driven story, I went with the same theme that I did in the previous example back to Star Wars. When the original Star Wars stories came out, they're very character-driven stories. It's easy to think of them as milieu stories because it's this vast galaxy with all these different worlds and these different aliens and all this stuff going on. But at the core of the original Star Wars trilogy, the story is about a boy who goes off, gets thrown into the world, finds adventure, finds conflict, and at the end of it, he redeems his name through redeeming his father. So that story is 100% a character-driven story, and it's driven by a very consistent character throughout the trilogy. If you remember, Luke starts out very young, very naive, very pie in the sky. I'm going to be a pilot. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be a hero. And he quickly learns that the world is not as cut and dry as he thinks it is. It's not as... easy to swallow, and it's not going to conform to his dreams just because that's what he wants to do. So this character consistently grows from this naive boy to a mature man. When we get to the Return of the Jedi, he believes in himself. He's confident. He's no longer so man, the word I'm looking for is just escaping me. He's no longer just so man, I can't think of the word, and that kills me. It sucks to be a writer and have words just fly out of your head like that. but you know what I mean. Like he's grounded. He's very practical in his approach to everything when we get to the Return of the Jedi, and he's learned that because the world's not as black and white as he originally thought it was, that there are areas of gray, and that people, including the most evil person that anybody has ever heard of, Darth Vader, has shades of gray somewhere in them. He believes that his father can be redeemed. So when we get to the end of the Return of the Jedi, when he has the opportunity to eliminate the most evil being in the galaxy, he refuses. He believes that he can save his father, that this man who has killed millions, possibly billions, can be saved. And this is important. This is an important key element of this character, Luke Skywalker. He believes in redemption, and he has hope, and he has he believes firmly that that no one is lost, even the most evil being in the galaxy. So then when we get to Luke Skywalker in the sequel trilogy, our character, our mature, practical, hopeful man who believes that the most evil being in the galaxy is worth saving, takes a 180. And Rian Johnson tries to tell us why, and the why of it does not make any sense. And this is the part that you may have trouble with. If you liked The Last Jedi, it's fine if you liked The Last Jedi. You do not have to agree with me on this. I didn't. Mainly because of the inconsistencies of the characters from what they went from. Even the characters in The Force Awakens, Rey, Poe, and Finn, are not the same characters in The Last Jedi that they were in The Force Awakens. And Luke is not the same character as he was in the original trilogy. So we are supposed to believe that this man who believed that anybody can be saved almost killed his nephew because he dreamed or saw a dream of his nephew becoming a Sith. That inconsistency in character destroyed that character's believability. It destroyed that character's ability to drive the story. Now, the sequel trilogy is not about Luke, but even your tertiary characters, your secondary characters, have to be consistent, especially if you take them from one series or one trilogy or one set of books into a future set of books. If they are no longer the same character, you're going to have people who knew them before, knew them as friends, because remember, your audience is going to become friends with your characters. That same audience is not going to accept that when you get to the new trilogy or series of books or whatever it is that you have them in. So that, to me, is a very bad example of how to write a character, especially carried on from one story to another. So when you write your characters, and there's so much more than this hour long can or if we go an hour, half hour, whatever we're going to make this episode, when you write your characters, make sure that you know them as good as you know yourself, as good as you know your friends. Write out their motivations. When I build a character, I sit down and I have a four category outline, sort of, for my character backgrounds. In the first category is the basics. What do they look like? What color's their hair? What color's their eyes? How tall are they? What do they normally wear? What do they look like? Their appearance. The second category is going to be their personality. What are they like? Do they laugh a lot? Do they like to tell jokes? Do they have a good time? Are they stern? Are they stoic? Or are they mean? Are they cold? Are they whatever? Write out their personality. Give yourself a brief paragraph about what they normally, how other people perceive them. Don't just write what the character is, but also write what how people perceive that character, because that's going to become important if you're not writing from a single perspective. In the event you write a story that might follow the perspective of two characters or more, you're going to need to know what other people think about that character, what their outside perspective is, or what the perception of them is outside. And then below personality, I put their history, their backstory, where'd they come from, who were their parents, where were they born, what did they do when they were young, what did they, and it doesn't need to be a lot, it doesn't need to be every day of their life, it just needs to be enough so that you have nuggets of information to pull out when you write this character story, things that they can reference back to when they're thinking about the events of their life. And then finally, and most importantly to me, is their motivations. If you don't know why your character's in the story, then you're not going to be able to convince your audience that they should be there. And you're not going to be able to convince the audience that they have a reason for existing. Your character needs to have motivation. Why do they get up every day and do what they do? If your character's an adventurer, let's say you're writing an adventure story, whether it be fantasy or it be like Indiana Jones, why does your character get up and do what they do? Indiana Jones, good example. Why does Indiana Jones get out of bed every day and fly to the Middle East or fly to Asia or fly to South America to find artifacts? Well, Indiana Jones believes that artifacts need to be protected. They should be shared with the world. They should be in museums. That belongs in a museum, he says a lot. You know that because that character's motivation was written into the story. You don't have to guess at why they do what they do. You need to know that motivation, or you won't be able to put it in the story. So you need to be able to tell your audience by knowing yourself, why do they do it? Why do they keep doing it? What made them decide to be what they are? Why did Indiana Jones decide to become an archaeologist? I would be willing to bet that Lucas and Spielberg have a pretty good motivational backstory for Indiana Jones. Why does he do what he did? Why did he become a professor? Why did he become an archaeologist? Why did he change his name to Indiana from Henry? Those things we learn through the course of the stories, but those things had to exist before they could write that character. Somebody had to sit down and decide those things. So you need to decide those things. And when you build that character, when you have that concrete foundation for that character, then you can take that character into the story and use that foundation to move the story along. And that's what your character-driven story is. So we're going to keep this all one part. We're going to move into character-driven story from characters. Now, a character-driven story, let's go to the words of somebody that's much smarter and obviously more successful than me. Let me find the chapter here. The chapter in this book, I believe it's called Mice, for milieu, idea, I don't remember, character, and it's the different types of characters. And I gotta find the chapter here for mice, because I want to give you the words of somebody who's actually a professional at this. Not that I'm not a professional, but you know what I mean. What he calls the mice quotient: milieu, idea, character, and event. Those are the four main types of stories that he talks about. So a character story is about a person trying to change his role in life. It begins at the point when the main character finds his present situation intolerable and sets out to change. It ends when the character either finds a new role, willingly returns to the old one, or despairs of improving his lot. So a character-driven story is about a character or characters, because you can write a character-driven story about a group of people, who have decided that what they're doing with their lives or what's happening to them in their lives is no longer something they want to do, and they want to go on and change it. But they can't always change it. Not every story ends with a happy, successful, major change, right? But there should be some change. Either your character's attitude about what they are doing changes. Maybe they realize what they are doing, like It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life is a character-driven story in which the character realizes that the thing he thought was intolerable is actually good. He believes he just does not believe his life is as good as it is. And then the story is about him learning that it is. So the character still changes. His situation doesn't change. His perspective on the situation changes. So when they talk about character change, it doesn't necessarily mean that the character should decide that his life is not good the way it is and he completely changes it to something else. That change could be in his mind. He no longer believes that what he was doing is bad. He accepts that it's actually the best part of him. So that could be one of the things that drives or motivates your character to change. You could write a character-driven story about a woman in an abusive relationship who has had enough. And the story is about her finding a safe way to get out of that situation and change her life. It may also include finding independence with a different, better job, moving out on her own, or moving in with a friend, or moving back in with her parents, or whatever the situation may be. But that story is going to be about her doing the things that need to be done to change her life. That, in a nutshell, is what a character-driven story is. And if you don't have a good character to do that, your audience isn't going to care about why they're doing it. They're not going to care that this person doesn't like their life situation. If you write a character, let's go back to the It's a Wonderful Life. If our main character in that story, and forgive me, I don't remember his name, I'd have to Google it because I'm terrible with names. But if our main character in It's a Wonderful Life had been a complete and total jerk and a completely inconsistent character, and let's say he was mean to his children, we probably wouldn't care if he got any better. It wouldn't be quite the same. On the flip side, A Christmas Carol, which just came to mind, it's one of my favorite movies. It's probably one of my favorite books, too. I recently read it for the first time, which I don't know why I waited so long, because I've loved this movie since I was a kid. When we first meet Ebenezer Scrooge, we don't like him. He's a jerk. He's mean to his employees. He's greedy. He's overly practical. But what we see around him initially in the story are people like his nephew Fred. We get a glimpse of how other people believe that he may not be as bad as we're led to believe in the story. But that is a very character-driven story, and it starts with a character that we don't like, an unsympathetic character. And it's a very dangerous way to start your story. If you don't deliver, if the payoff at the end of the story isn't good, you're going to lose the audience forever because they won't trust you again. That's the danger of writing a story like A Christmas Carol. The benefit to what the author did with that book is that it's short. It is not a very long story, and he very quickly got to the point where the main character realizes his life is intolerable. Now, in this situation, that decision was taken out of his hands. It was decided for him. So it's sort of initially we're like, oh, okay, good. He's going to get his, right? So we have a character we don't like, an unsympathetic character, and the powers that be have come along and said, you're going to change or this is what's going to happen. And the audience, we're looking at that going, oh, good. That's the right way to handle. This guy's not a nice guy. He's mean to people. He's greedy. He hoards gold. He believes that the poor should just, die and get rid of the surplus population. So we don't like him. And so when the ghosts and the spirits come and say, you're going to change or you're going to wind up carrying chains around for eternity, we're like, yeah, good, get him, right? But if the payoff at the end of the story hadn't been so good, that he probably would have never sold, and God, names, he probably never would have sold another book again, and his name will come to me at the end of this. But anyway, point being, it's the same format, but it doesn't always have to come from the same position, the same perspective. Just be careful. Just be careful if you're going to write an unsympathetic character. So those are a couple good examples of character-driven story that you can use sort of to think about when you're doing your own. If you're going to create this character, do you want people to like them? If not, you need to very quickly give us a reason to follow the thread. Give us a reason to keep going, to read about this despicable human being or whatever, their despicable alien or whatever it is. Give us a reason to read about them and stay involved, because you can lose them quickly. Then keep them consistent throughout the story. If your plot's going to keep going in a sensible direction, your character needs to be consistent. You can't change them around. You can't completely do 180s. You can't change how they view the world, because your audience will then stop following the plot. Like they won't care as much, and your plot won't be driven very well by that character. And then make sure the character is driving the plot. If you're doing a character-driven story, you literally got to have the character driving the story. It can be more than one character. You can have a character. My current work in progress has two main character perspectives. A lot of the times they're together. There will be times where they're apart. So, but both of those characters need to be driving their own part of the story as a team. If I have one of them just drop off and just stop doing whatever it is they're doing, their motivation for moving forward changes, I'm going to lose my audience, and then they won't be holding up their half of the story, and then the whole thing's going to fall apart. I'm trying to think of a good example of a bad example, and the only thing I can think of right off the top of my head is the Luke Skywalker example we talked of before, the inconsistency between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. That really should be an example that's used more commonly, I think, to show how you're going to lose an audience, because it did quite literally lose an audience when that happened. So no questions in the chat. Hopefully this was informative. Hopefully it gave you some inspiration to look into some more stuff. Again, if you are catching it late, check out Characters and Viewpoint by Orson Scott Card. This covers not only character-driven story, but characters, perspective, tense, dialogue writing. It does cover how backgrounds and things like that. Check out my books on Amazon. You can find the links on my Twitter page. I think I've got them on the description below, but Embers of Liberty, When Heroes Rise, The Realm of Thrall Collector's Edition. Check out those books. You can find me Twitter, Facebook, all the links in the video description below. I will probably be doing some more game streaming, but check out my other writing streams. I even have some live edit streams where you can literally see me reading aloud Embers of Liberty, my first novel, and editing it in real time. There's many episodes in the writing section. Just go to the playlist section in YouTube and check out the all of the writing videos that I've done. There's quite a few of them there, so you can see that. Ask me questions in the comments. If you're watching the recording, be sure to like, comment, subscribe. I love chatting to you guys, so ask me any questions you want. Let me know what you think of the shows. If you think something needs to change or would be better a different way, let me know. I love feedback. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. If you want a follow-up episode with more, let me know. I am looking for more topics too. I'm going to put that on Twitter. I've got one more topic from viewers, and then I'm going to have to come up with my own topics unless you guys give me some more. So if there's something out there you want to know about that nobody else is talking about, or you want my perspective on it, please drop a line here. Come to Twitter and let me know, or find me on Facebook, whatever it is. Go to my website, email me. I want to make sure I get tired of, and I'm going to drone on here for a minute, but you guys said, well, if you've been doing any sort of writing for enough time and you've been to any sort of writing seminars, you know what I mean when I say there's a lot of wasted time. You go to a seminar that's supposed to be about one topic and they wind up getting sidetracked into something else, or they don't cover exactly what you were looking for in that topic, or worse yet, it's a general writing class and they don't talk about anything you're interested in. They talk about the same thing you heard last time. So I don't want to do that. I want to make sure you guys are getting the perspective and ideas and lessons that you're interested in, the things that other people aren't covering. You can find a ton of podcasts out there about whatever writing topic you want. I want to give you guys my thoughts on the things you aren't hearing. So send those to me. Let me know what you think. I will see you guys next time. See you for some Frags and Beer Gaming probably late tonight, and maybe some more episodes next week. You guys have a great one. I will see you next time. Much love.